Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays, hosted by someone's favorite film buff, Nathan. I love movies and I want to share that with you. From old originals to cult classics and foreign favorites, along with straight up drivel, WWW is your place for all things movies. Stick around and we'll leave you with a movie to watch over the weekend with your family or that special someone. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. 88.1 The Burg, your music central. My name is Nathan. Welcome to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for tonight's show, it's currently high noon. No, it isn't, Nathan. It's 8 p.m. at night. What are you talking about? Well, it may not be high noon now, but it technically will be high noon for the entirety of the show because we're talking about Western movies. More specifically, we're talking about the $3 movies, the Dollars Trilogy. That being A Fistful of Dollars for a Few Dollars More, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which doesn't have dollars in the title, and I feel like this is the biggest scam since somebody shorted me out of that money on that one sidewalk in Costa Rica that I've never been to in my life. Here's the point. We're talking about the Dollars Trilogy. A Fistful of Dollars from 1964 for a Few Dollars More from 1965, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly from 1966. So stick around. 88.1 The Burg, your music central. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. My name is Nathan, and the first movie we're looking at on the watch list tonight is A Fistful of Dollars from 1964, available to watch on Max. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is one of the most famous westerns of all time. But it's not necessarily a standalone movie. It's part of the Dollars Trilogy, which started a couple years before its time with A Fistful of Dollars. This is the official sort of cinematic debut of the man with no name, otherwise known as No Name to me and some other people I think in the movies, but I like to call him No Name. Very famously played by Clint Eastwood. No, played by Clint Eastwood. Man with No Name is kind of this iconic Western figure, sort of a larger-than-life, kind of like John Wayne, except nobody knows anything about him, unlike John Wayne, where everybody knew that I think his first name was Leslie. So the Man with No Name starts off on his adventure in A Fistful of Dollars by arriving at a town with two smuggler families running the town, knocking everybody up, and kind of causing a riot. And he decides to pair with one of the teams and pair with the other side of the team, other team, and play them against each other. He decides, I'm gonna just screw them all up by saying I belong to the Baxters, one of the smuggling families, and then I'm going to tell the other ones, the Rojos, that I belong to the Baxters, and I'll become part of the Rojos and tell the Baxters that I belong to the Rojos. I'm going to mix it all up. And if that sounded confusing at all from the way I just described it, good, because the movie does get a lot more confusing than that, and I'm really condensing it down. Sort of this, the common thread throughout the story is that the Man with No Name kind of just does whatever he wants and just messes with these two families the entire time. And it's great. Or it would have been absolutely amazing. It's just kind of amazing because of the fact that this movie is kind of an unofficial remake, quote unquote, heavy quotes, in terms of being an actual remake, in the fact that it is very heavily inspired by the movie Yojimbo. For those of you who haven't heard of Yojimbo, Yojimbo is an incredibly famous samurai movie directed by Akira Kurosawa, one of the most prolific Japanese directors, who is known for making these iconic samurai movies, Yojimbo being one of them. And let me tell you right now, the story similarities between Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars are uncanny. The entire thing with the two families, the only thing they really change up is the names, and the fact that it's set in Mexico instead of in Japan, like feudal Japan, it's now in like Mexico. It is basically the same story. There are two families that are fighting each other, and this one stranger wanders into town and turns them against each other and then causes a whole bunch of mayhem. It doesn't mean that A Fistful of Dollars is bad. I just really want to emphasize the fact that I'm not even like a massive fan of Yojimbo, And I did, in fact, see it first before watching A Fistful of Dollars. And I can't remember exactly if I read ahead of time or if I figured out after the fact. But I know for a fact somewhere in there, I went, oh yeah, this is totally just Yojimbo with guns instead of swords. And it's really obvious if you watch them both. I can only imagine watching them back to back. You're like, okay, this is just the same movie, just set in a different place. Again, that doesn't make A Fistful of Dollars bad at all. It's really just kind of playing into the fact that a lot of great cinema tends to build off of each other and tends to steal ideas from each other, like how Quentin Tarantino always steals references from other movies. It's a lot like The Magnificent Seven and Seven Samurai, which you can see the similarities there. They both have 7 in the title. Well, they're both technically the same story as well. And funnily enough, Seven Samurai was also directed by Akira Kurosawa. So the similarities go a lot deeper than you think. But aside from the inherent story similarities between Yojimbo and A Fistful of Dollars, there is at least one saving grace to make it not feel like the exact same thing all over again, even if you watch them back to back. And that is the debut of Man with No Name, as I mentioned, played by Clint Eastwood. Clint Eastwood knows how to take up the frame and make you not take your eyes off of him. He is larger than life in every sense of the word, the pure embodiment of chaotic goodness and evil wrapped into this weird maelstrom of male expression. What was the male? I got confused because I was saying maelstrom and then I wanted to say something in regards to manhood, but I said male, so maelstrom and male just got mixed up. And now I'm thinking of delivering the mail. This is ridiculous. So the big point is that Clint Eastwood is really what makes this movie. He's the part that stands out the most. He's the one that your attention's always focused on. And even though the Man with No Name clearly doesn't have like a character, or when you have a character called the Man with No Name, it's kind of easy to assume that he doesn't necessarily have a character. He's just there to be, he's there to kick butt and take names, always. And you really get that from his first appearance all the way to his last one. But it's not incredibly dominant in his portrayal in the first movie as much as it is in the third movie, is what I'm getting at. In Good, Bad, and the Ugly, you know already that he's going to do that. In this movie, it's like you're just kind of getting introduced to the fact that he does that. And it's mostly portrayed in the very infamous scene where he asks people to apologize to his pony and they respectfully disagree, to which he sends them on a fast track to the coffins, which is a very accurate depiction of that scene. I will say, I think A Fistful of Dollars is definitely the weakest one in the trilogy, but it doesn't make it not worth watching. It's not necessarily something you should skip over. And in terms of skipping over movies, the next one we'll talk about, For a Few Dollars More, is also not one that you should skip over, which is something I learned the hard way. So stick around for after the break where we get into that. 88.1 The Burg, you're at Music Central. My name is Nathan. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for the second movie on the watch list tonight, we are going to be taking a look at For a Few Dollars More from 1965, available to watch on Max. Yes, 1965, as in it came out a year after For a Fistful of Dollars, which was in 1964. So they were quick about releasing these movies, I'd say. So the plot of this movie is 2 bounty hunters come into town in search of a criminal by the name of El Indio and become an unlikely duo in their quest to kill him. And as I said, 2 bounty hunters. Who are they played by? Well, one of them is Clint Eastwood, who plays the Man with No Name. Once again, I'm sure he had a name in this movie, but he's kind of collectively... These 3 movies have been more collectively bundled together as a trilogy rather than being a full-on planned trilogy, but it definitely still shows signs of being kind of limped together intentionally. It's more so like they give him names in each of the movies, but you know for a fact that like the name doesn't actually stick. The character is still generally referred to as the Man with No Name. So, Man with No Name is one of those bounty hunters, and the other one is a character played by Lee Van Cleef. I don't necessarily remember the character's name because Lee Van Cleef is one of the people in Good, Bad, and the Ugly, but I believe he's a lieutenant of some sort. So it's Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef. They team up and they're gonna go fight this criminal, and it's an incredible ride. And okay, I gotta really admit something that I'm not necessarily proud to admit, which is I skipped over this movie when watching the series. I thought to myself, hey, I can't get access to for a few dollars more. I have access to a fistful of dollars, and I can watch The Good, Bad, and the Ugly, but I don't have for a few dollars more without renting it. I'm just going to skip it and not watch it. And I don't think I missed anything important. Turns out I was proven severely wrong. This movie is honestly my favorite out of the trilogy. And I will admit that I like this movie more than Good, Bad, and the Ugly. I also think that Once Upon a Time in the West, I like that one more than Good, Bad, and the Ugly. Although I will also admit that Good, Bad, and the Ugly is better than both of them. But more importantly, I accidentally skipped over the one that would become my favorite out of the series. Like, that is crazy to think about. If I had really kept that mentality of, oh, I can just skip it, I'm not going to miss anything, I would have actually missed something significant. And that's just crazy to me. It's crazy to think of that sort of situation where it's like, if something had gone wrong or something had gone this way, things may have been so much different. But I definitely don't regret going back and watching this movie, even though I didn't watch them, quote unquote, in order. And we'll talk about the quotes in just a second. Even though I didn't watch it in the specified order, I think it's definitely worth watching. It's the one that I'd put over the other two of saying, okay, if you think you need to skip this one, you are severely wrong. And here's why. The movie really stands on its own without the context of the first movie or The Good, Bad, and the Ugly. It can really kind of hold its own with the performances of Clint Eastwood and Lee Van Cleef. Their partnership is unlikely. It's not really making sense for the first little bit of it, but it has enough development put into it and enough solid writing to the point where it goes to a stage where you're like, okay, I'm glad these two are paired up together. They're an interesting duo. They have what it takes to really work together without one of them dominating the other in terms of screen time or attention put onto it. And it also has this very strong backbone for an actually legitimate story, which I know seems like it should go without saying, but with the style employed by these movies, it's kind of hard to think of it having like a incredibly strong story. It's a lot more about the style and the iconic music used in these movies than it is the story that they tell. Especially since I went on and on about how the first movie stole from Yojimbo so much. I will admit that I was, again, proven significantly wrong when I thought the story wouldn't be any good, by being given an incredibly compelling backstory for Lee Van Cleef's character. Again, man with no name, doesn't really have a personality, doesn't really have a technique to him. He just does whatever he wants and moves on with his life. Lee Van Cleef's character in this movie has a legitimate reason to go after the bounty on this villain, El Indio. He has motivations beyond just getting the money on his head. And it leads to it leads to a stars align moment that I still can't get out of my head. I can't get one shot from that scene out of my head. And it's right at the end, involving the final showdown. To explain it, I'll just kind of briefly gloss over the fact that It involves a little pocket watch that belonged to someone significant for Lee Van Cleef's character that El Indio ended up killing. And the song that plays through the stopwatch, because this stopwatch has a little music box in it, the song that plays is played as soon as he walks in to this epic final showdown where he gets to have the redemption he so desperately craves. And the little song is this tiny little ding-dong noise. For those of you who've seen the movie, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the movie, all I can do is recommend watching it just to get to that part to hear what I'm talking about. That song contributes so much to this final showdown that it makes it like I was unable to remove my eyes from the screen while watching that scene. It is one of my favorite standoff scenes, something that I'd love to emulate to the fullest extreme when making movies of my own. And I would say that it's the best standoff scene of all time. But we still haven't talked about the good, bad, and the ugly yet. So, stick around for after the break where we'll jump into that one. Because, again, I can be proven wrong severely. Welcome back to What to Watch Wednesdays. And for the last movie on our watch list tonight, we are going to be taking a look at The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly from 1966, available to watch on Max. So, basic plot. It features the man with no name, otherwise known as No Name, otherwise known as Blondie in this movie. Like I said, they give him a name in each movie, and this one's the funniest because they call him Blondie, and he's blonde. It's hilarious, I tell you. But he's known as the Good. Lee Van Cleef, otherwise known as Angel Eyes, is the bad. And we have Tuco, played by Eli Wallach, otherwise known as the Ugly One. Which is very funny because calling people ugly is funny and you cannot convince me otherwise. You could convince me otherwise, but this is a Western movie and one of the characters is just literally called ugly. Okay, that's funny. That's a funny subtitle. But it follows them as they track down gold in the Civil War. And it's iconic. It's a classic. It's a 3-hour-long Western epic directed by Sergio Leone. Meaning that there are long shots of not a bunch of stuff happening on screen. And you really gotta force yourself through it in order to really get a whole lot out of the experience before the finale. I'm not saying this is bad in any stretch, by any stretch of the imagination. It's iconic for a very good reason. And that reason is the song, the very specific Good, Bad, and the Ugly theme song, composed by Ennio Morricone. It plays over the opening title, and you've heard it before. If you haven't heard it before, you're lying. You've heard it before. I know you've heard it before. You cannot have not heard this song before. And fun fact about me, I'm incredibly immature, so I find goofy things funny. And I find it incredibly funny that one of the most iconic Western... No, why did I say one of the most iconic? That's a lie. The most iconic Western song of all time has these little noises of wah, wah, wah. It makes me think of a trumpet that's played on a late night television show when the host says something stupid and it doesn't really land as a joke. And then one of the band members just goes, wah, 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 wah. It just makes me think of that. It just makes me think of that. Like I said, I'm incredibly immature and I find that kind of thing very funny. So naturally, when I'm watching the most iconic Western of all time, I'm going to think about that when the song is playing. It's ridiculous. Thankfully, they don't use it for the final showdown because otherwise I couldn't take that scene seriously. But like I said, the song is the iconic part of the movie. The real quote-unquote issue with Good, Bad, and the Ugly is that it's done by one of the most notoriously slow directors of all time, that being Sergio Leone. I swear this is a constant with him. I've seen enough of his movies to know for a fact that he does it. And when I say I've seen enough of his movies, I mean I've seen the other two movies in the Dollars trilogy. I've seen A Fistful of Dollars and For a Few Dollars More. And I've seen this one. They are notoriously slow. He's very methodical about how he moves the camera and what he's showing happening on screen. The amount of movement that he's actually showing happen, it's very much a common thing for a scene to contain a lot of shots of not a lot happening. And it's kind of like watching very minimal amounts of movement happen. It's not kind of, it's everything kind of feels like it's in slow motion. And you really sometimes gotta force yourself to sit through that kind of thing to get to the good stuff. Sit through may seem like a bit of it's like, are you trying to be mean here? I'm more so saying that I understand why he's doing it. I understand his artistic intent. I know where he's going with it, and I can really appreciate how methodical he's being with it. But dang it, it's so many shots of not a lot happening that there is such a risk of me getting bored. I am sorry. Like, there's always that risk where I'll just be sitting there bored out of my mind when I'm supposed to be having a good time at a movie. Like, I don't get straight up bored, but like, there's the chance of it being there just hovers over me when watching any of his movies, that it's like, it's a wonder I get through them at all. And part of that has to do with just attention deficit, not being able to focus on something for such a long period of time. But this one, it's important to bring it up since it is a 3-hour-long epic. When you apply that kind of style to such a lengthy movie, it really starts to bleed through. You really start to see it. And I think that's part of the reason why I'm mentioning it in this one specifically. But I would be amiss if I didn't mention what I set out to mention in the review of For a Few Dollars More. That being that this movie's main event is the final standoff between Blondie, Angel Eyes, and Tuco. That scene's just made it all worth it. I swear to you, even the 40-minute sequence, or it's not even like, it's maybe 30 minutes, but like a full-on war sequence during the middle of the Civil War that felt like it had nothing to do with the story is absolutely worth suffering and trudging through to see this final confrontation between our good, bad, and ugly people. And keep in mind, they're called specifically good, bad, and ugly. But the beauty of this scene is that all three of them are bad. They're all horrible people. They've killed other people in the movie. They've trudged across they've trudged a long distance. That was a great way of saying that. They've trudged across a long distance, killing anyone in their way. And they have never once hesitated when doing it. And here they are face to face with each other, and they all have one common goal. And they aren't going to let the other two get in the way. And, of course, they managed to pull this off for so many reasons that it's not hard to count, but it's like, what all did they actually get right? And then you step back for a second, like I did, and you go, wait, there were like more things than I originally thought that they got right than I had originally planned for them to get right. That's the way I'd describe it. From everything from the facial expressions to the framing of their facial expressions with the camera, to the music that plays in the background, to their acting and the editing used to show each face on screen during it and how it matches with the tone of the music. Just everything about it works in tandem to create an incredibly tense scene where you know all three of them have a weapon, they're not afraid to use it on each other, and this is the end. This is our final showdown. Like, we know it's going to end this way. We know it's going to end here, but best of all, we don't know how it's going to end. Even if you've seen the movie before, I can guarantee you may not have remembered how it exactly goes down, and you're just sitting there in awe at this incredibly cinematic moment. That it's the on paper equivalent of three guys just standing there and staring at each other, becoming the most tense encounter in all of cinema as you watch it unfold in front of you, and you never truly know how it actually turns out until one of them fires a shot. Absolutely beautiful. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. It conveys everything that you ought to love about cinema. I know I loved it, and I tend to love movies. I tend to have a radio show where I talk about movies, and I gotta love them to talk about them. This is one of those times where I am confirmed that I love movies so much. This scene makes you remember why. So that is all for What to Watch Wednesdays tonight. Thank you for tuning in. I do, in fact, run a second show here on the Burg on Saturdays from 9 to 11 a.m. called What to Watch Weekends. It's a little bit more of a deeper dive. And for those of you who are also curious, I have an Instagram account for the show, that being at What to Watch Wednesdays. I post reviews there. I post along text ones with number scores and stuff like that. So check that out. And at your own discretion, I tend to post there. Excuse the wordage of my verbals here. And that's basically it. I will be back on the Burg next Wednesday from 8 to 9. So, signing off.